All right, well, we can start turning over to Daniel chapter 3. That's where we'll be picking up. I don't have a new song for you to learn this time. I've been enjoying that feature, and so definitely if there are some that we would like to learn, we can do that. I should have asked Tom to see if he had any on your mind, but we'll keep on doing that as we continue meeting every second and fourth Sunday. But it's also been a little while since I've gotten to be up here. I tried to let Austin get as many classes in as he could before Laurel came, and we're thankful she's here. But I thought I could squeeze one more out of him, but it's okay. I'm happy she's here safely. So Daniel chapter 3 is where we're at. We do have those questions on the material. We'll kind of use that as the outline, the basis for what we'll cover. But of course, I would much rather hear us discussing and talking things through than just answering questions. In fact, I will probably ask you questions that are not in the material because it's more fun that way. And it makes us think. So even if you prepared, which I appreciate if you did, we'll also hopefully have some good discussion questions too. But let's go ahead and start with a word of prayer, and then we'll jump right into Daniel chapter 3. Friendly, please. Lord God and Father, we're so thankful that you are so great a God who has given us this time and opportunity to open up your word together. We ask, oh God, that you grant us discernment, that you grant us wisdom, and that you grant us clarity of mind so we can see truly what your will is, how you have always been a God who has rescued his people, who has provided for them, has provided strength and courage when hard times are demanded of your people. And we ask, oh God, that we see our own lives in the scriptures we're about to read this evening, that we can more adequately serve you, more so give you the glory that we even do right now, that you may be magnified in all that we do and say and think, and that we can live lives that are exemplifying the nature of your kingdom, the great kingdom that your Son has ushered in as King, seated on your right hand, enthroned on high. Of course, oh God, we recognize the cost that went into that he came to this earth and died for us, that we might be made part of so great a kingdom and can live according to your will, because he has cleansed us of our sins, and through his great sacrifice we ask that we can see your great plan unfolding in the scriptures we see before us, even in these times of old, and how it impacts us even to this day. Help us, oh God, to continue to persevere, to continue to look for you as the sovereign over all nations that even this earth has to offer. We thank you, O God, for this time once again, and please be with us now. It's through your Son's name that we pray. Amen. So Daniel chapter 3 is not all that far into the study, although it's been a couple months now, but hopefully we're having a good, solid foundation of what's to come, what's to be expected. I want to bring us back to our objectives here. I mentioned this in the very early beginning parts of class, trying to take the principles that we see here in the text of Daniel and extrapolating that into something that's much more practical. Like how do we actually implement this in our lives? And we said in principle, what's like the main principle at play here if we're really going to simplify and sum it all up in terms of Daniel? What's on full display? It's kind of in that subtitle too. That's all good. God's in control. And we should be proclaiming that phrase over and over and over again. Do we always fully live out what that means? No, we still have our doubts and our shortcomings in that. But we proclaim that principle that God is in control. We see that throughout all of these kingdoms that we see in Daniel and even beyond that. But the practical element there is like, well, what does that really look like? How do we respond in light of this fact that is the reality that God is in control? And so, based on chapters 1 and 2 of Daniel so far, what is the practical? How do we live that out? You think of anything specifically? Like, oh yes, as we were studying chapters 1 and 2, I was really glad because now I've been trying to implement this in my own life. It's hard because we're not living in captivity. Well, not in the same sense, I should say. But yeah.
As long as we submit to him, we're going to be fine.
Yeah, it's that idea of, well, we have comfort in that sense, but also if he is in control, then what goes on around us, does it matter? Well, in the long run, no. Although that doesn't make it any more easy to go through, certainly. Any other ideas or answers so far? I mean, we're just now starting to build on this practical. We're going to get more of that in chapter 3, but just want to see if there's... So you said trust and obey? Yeah. Yeah. And as simple as the phrase is, you're thinking like, okay, yeah, if I was in Daniel's position and I'm before the king's court and facing the pressures of all these other, well, it would have been not just the Chaldeans, but it would have even been other Hebrews. It would have been those who should have been following God but chose not to. There is that pressure there. But what we do see is, in that is, how do you live that out if God's in control? It's not, oh, I'm just going to isolate myself then, and he's got it covered. Like, it's all good. Are they isolated? Are they withdrawing themselves from society? Remind me really quick, where are they and what kind of positions are they serving? Yeah, so yeah, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I mean, they are not just in Babylon, but they're in like the king's court. They're serving in the government. They're not going off and forming their own community, just hoping that this all passes by. We got to wait through 70 years for captivity to end. They are engaged, I mean, forcefully, so let's be honest there. But they're not being passive in this, right? This isn't a call to just say like, we'll just pray and wait this out. They are active in what's going on. And there's a lot of boldness going on here too, right? As we see them standing before the king. And chapter 3 is no different. So we'll get there. We highlighted some key aspects of God's character so far. And again, one of the other aspects of our theme here is really, if you want to boil it down to 3 key terms of what God does and also what's shown about his character. He's a God who, as we saw in chapter 2, he reveals. The Chaldeans, the magicians, the sorcerers, the dream tellers couldn't figure out what Nebuchadnezzar, not even just what the dream meant, but they didn't even know what the dream was because Nebuchadnezzar tested them in that. But he revealed that to Daniel. We're going to see here in chapter 3 and then later in chapter 6. Don't forget, as we look at this, there's going to be a lot of parallels. Wait till we get to chapter 6. Chapter 6 is Daniel in the lion's den. You're going to see a lot of similarities to what we see in chapter 3, which is Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego being thrown into, not a lion's den, but into a furnace. So very similar. But God is one who rescues. So spoiler alert, that's the ultimate end of this story. So if we get that from today's study, then I'm all good. We're just seeing that character. Ultimately, we're going to see that God rules as we see thrones being set up and thrones being torn down in chapters 4 and chapter 7. So don't forget that's where we're going. But one last little pattern or structure here is, we've gone through so far chapter 2, chapter 3 is what we're heading into now. So we've had this vision of the 4 kingdoms. We're going to get into our first, maybe shouldn't call it a martyr story because they don't die, they're delivered. But you have the 3 friends here. That's going to be mirrored, of course, with chapter 6 with the lions that we talked about. And we kind of see how this is what's working inwards and working back outwards. So we'll touch on the pride aspects with Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar later. But looking at those 2, this is what's so beautiful about the book of Daniel as we're looking at this section, chapters 2 through 7, why are we grouping those together? What's the kind of cohesive element there? Do you remember? It's not a one we usually think of because we just read and it all goes together. The language? Yeah, the language that they're in, right? So chapters 2 through 7 is all in what language? Not Hebrew, it's Aramaic, right? Which is really obviously similar, and you can see a lot of similarities in that language. But that's what kind of groups all these together because there's really pointed toward speaking to the nations, speaking to not just, hey, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, or the Israelites who'd be listening to this, but it's speaking to the nations. So really, at the end of the day, all throughout here, we're going to see in chapter 2, 3, and 4, it's a character development of Nebuchadnezzar. Yeah, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are going to pop up here. Honestly, not until, I don't think we get them mentioned until around verse 10 or so. So the whole first part of the chapter is all about Nebuchadnezzar and what he does. So I don't want us to forget that part. But then how else do we connect these stories together? Here's what's really neat, is I think every single chapter links to the next chapter. It's such a beautiful thing. So we haven't read chapter 3 yet, but knowing what you know about chapter 2, the image, the statue we saw set up, crashing down in the vision, what kind of connects then to chapter 3? If you're like looking at verse 1, anything just stand out to you there? It's like, oh, this is kind of like it's almost funny as we see this. Like,
One time somebody did solid gold.
Yes.
Daniel had pointed out the dream.
Yes, exactly. So if you go back to yes, and that's really going to be our first question here. We'll talk about it in a second. If you go back really quick to chapter 2 and you look in verse 38, Daniel's saying revealing the image of the dream and what he saw over and over again, what Nebuchadnezzar saw, and what he tells them ultimately is at the end of verse 38, you are the head of gold. And so what do we read in verse 1 of chapter 3? Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold. All gold. You're not just the head, he's all of it. So I think there's going to be some more there that we see, but every single one of these chapters is going to connect just like that. And it's almost kind of comical because really, do we know the solution, the resolution of all this? God's in control. Might have some workings of man here, but So let's keep on going here. Someone want to read for me the first 7 verses, and then we'll kind of start working through these questions here and work through the text. Verses 1 through 7.
Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold, whose height was 60 cubits and its width 6 cubits. And he set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. And King Nebuchadnezzar sent word to gather together the satraps, the administrators, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So the satraps, the administrators, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces gathered together for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. They stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then a herald cried aloud, "To you it is commanded, O peoples, nations, languages, that at the time you hear the sound of the horn, flute, the harp, lyre, and psaltery, in symphony with all kinds of music, you shall fall down and worship the gold image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast immediately into the midst of the fiery furnace." So at that time, when all the people heard the sound of the horn, the flute, the harp, and the lyre, in symphony with all kinds of music, all the people, nations, and languages fell down and worshiped the gold image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up.
Thank you. Notice a lot of repetition there. Lots of repeated things should stand out to you. You're like, well, okay, why would we say, okay, let's gather all these different government officials, and then we'll repeat that in the next verse that all the government officials came? Or, hey, we're going to worship this with all the different instruments, and the next verse, okay, we will. From an interesting structure standpoint, because I think this is going to help us understand why I spend so much time repeating all of these things.
Just as a science lawyer, I would have said, and all those officials I mentioned before.
Save you a little effort there, right? We already talked about those. We outlined those pretty directly. Yeah. power. In what way?
Nebuchadnezzar has the power. He has the ultimate power over all of these people. He not only he's conquered an enormous amount of territory, which is fairly new to him and early because he doesn't reign very long.
No.
His kingdom at this time is almost the same size as the United States.
Yeah, and that's a great comparison too, which
No, but I'm saying he did that for power. He said he gave the order,
they did it.
They obeyed.
Yes. So it is power in that, hey, he said it, they did it, right? And notice one other thing that's repeated, one final third thing that's repeated, and it seems kind of redundant. Over. Okay, Nebuchadnezzar had set up, oh, that's a really big keyword. We'll look at some things in a little bit too. So he sets it up. Again, he does it. There's no conflict here, right? It just happens. The conflict's going to come a little bit later. But one other thing too, one other phrase you may have overlooked.
Well, no one resisted.
No.
I think that's the whole thing. The whole kingdom is doing it.
Well, it was, sorry,
Go ahead.
it required that they fall down and worship it, so they are, the words escape me. Subservient.
Yeah, they're obedient. They're actually doing what he said. There seems to be no question here. Now, again, we don't know this yet, but as we get into the next couple of verses, we realize, oh, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did not bow down, although it's not mentioned here, but everybody else did. So, yeah, that one last phrase is the first three words we see in the verse 1. Nebuchadnezzar the king. And look how many times that's said that way. In verse 2, then Nebuchadnezzar the king. Well, we know he's the king. We already knew that from chapter 2. And then you keep on going later on in verse 3. And Nebuchadnezzar the king. Why repeat that over and over again? Nebuchadnezzar the king. Goes back to power again, right? He says it, he does it, he's the king. Except, is he really? That's the question at play here. It's almost kind of mocking who he truly is. So, I guess then the question is, we got a creation. And I use that phrase very specifically because that's what it is. Bill already mentioned. He set it up. It's something created. He can act as a creator, but it's just a created thing that he's setting up here. Narrative, right? So we see the linking going on here. We'll talk about the size in a moment, but just like we ended that vision of, oh, the whole statue crashes down, it was probably because it wasn't all made of gold, right? That was probably the reason why that stone not cut from human hands came and cut it down, because all those other metals, they weren't great. So let's just make it all gold, right? Let's make it all gold. So he obviously doesn't heed the warning. He figures he might as well make his own statue from the dream, this time all of gold. But is that really why he does this? I guess that's the question I want to get to really quickly, is why does Nebuchadnezzar do this? And we've used the word power, but I want to get more specific than that. Because did he already have power? Yeah, he had a lot of power. And it was growing power. Probably wanted more power, because that's how power works, right? But why do you think he did this? And I think there's a lot of clues here, again, in some of the repetition and things like that, but it's a purpose.
So there was pride attached to his power.
Okay. So when he sets this up, it's kind of stoking his own ego, right? Like, oh, yeah, these people. Okay, why else, though? I think that's, all of these things go together. It's not like one answer. Yeah, Mark?
All people, all nations, all languages, they're all going to do this together.
All, which I kind of alluded to in the title for that section. It's a golden image that unites. Because here's the thing, at this time, this is again pretty early on in Nebuchadnezzar's reign here, there were several rebellions that he had to put down. Right? We had some in 595, some later in 594. And so as you have these rebellions you put down, what's the solution to stopping the rebellions? Well, you can wipe everybody out. I guess that's one solution.
Trying to unite them.
Pull them together, right? If everyone is united under my one single banner of Nebuchadnezzar's empire, then they'll all fall in line, we'll have peace, it will be a perfect society. I mean, that's what people try to say and do, but not what happens. But unity is part of that goal here. But is that really the solution or the end, what ends up happening?
Since he was the golden head in the dream, is he thinking maybe this is the way he tends to exalt himself to be the judge?
I think so. I think so. He is exalting himself. There is pride involved. There is ego. There is a goal of uniting all peoples. Because at the end of the day, if you are the one who unites all peoples, well, that goes back to my pride. I did that. I did this. I created a whole one world government. That's really what he's trying to do. He's bringing in all peoples from all over the place. And he will say it later too. So yeah, we'll keep on getting to that. But he obviously missed the point, right? He missed the point because ultimately, what did we end? What did we end with in chapter 2? What destroys the statue that was partly of gold and all these other things too, representing all those different world kingdoms that are to come or are in existence already? What truly destroys it? The stone from the mountain. And now what does that stone do, if you remember back in verse 35 of chapter 2? It smashes that statue, becomes like chaff on the threshing floor, and then what happens? It just destroyed. A great that stone, what does it say? That statue became, the stone that stuck the statue became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. What is Nebuchadnezzar doing here? He's doing the inverse of that. Do you see what he's doing? What is he doing instead of being that mountain that then reaches out to the whole earth? He's like bringing them all in, right? He's like, I'm going to call all of them to me. They're all. It's very self-centered there. So he's doing the inverse of what that great kingdom that is to come, ultimately, of course, in Christ, will go out and do. And there's some nuances there that we'll see. Of course, Israel knew that all the nations were going to stream to them. If we go to Isaiah 2, but ultimately, go to Acts, see what happens. How does this kingdom spread? It goes out and it takes over the whole. A failed attempt, right? What about the size of this creation real quick? Because what even is this thing? It's like 60 cubits by 6 cubits, and then if you translate that into our modern understanding, it's going to be close to like 90 feet or so tall. Now, I always grew up thinking, he puts up a statue of himself, because it would make sense from chapter 2. It could be, but it'd be a really stretched out version of himself, because those dimensions, I don't think they really fit. So what is this image? We could speculate, so I guess it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. But what is this likely? Any guesses? Perfect. So I put that word obelisk up there, right? So this probably looks more like a golden Washington monument. Well, not that tall, because that one's pretty tall. But at the same time, something very similar, which, that's just kind of making a guess. Ancient cultures, Egypt to Babylon, use those obelisks all the time. Guess what? Right in front of their temples. It's like a bridge between heaven and earth kind of thing. Like, what is Nebuchadnezzar doing here? Is it representative of God? Maybe. Is it representative of just idolatry in general? They're worshiping it. So certainly, I think we see later on, there's evidence both, I think in verse 12 and in verse 14, that this is likely, serving some kind of God. At the end of the day, who is it not serving? The God, the Most High God. So that's very clear. So as we keep on going, though, I know we already mentioned this. Who is called to attend this dedication? It's all peoples. We specify this multiple times, and we're going to specify again at the end of the chapter. It's all these peoples, all these different officials, and we know what they're commanded to do. They're commanded to worship, right? So here's what's interesting too. It's not only that it's all, well, that word kind of encapsulates it all, but as we have like, okay, why do we list off like satraps, prefects, governors? Can we just say like all the government officials? Wouldn't that cover it? Kind of interesting because all of these different words are borrowed from different languages too. I think satraps, that's a Greek transliteration of a word. So we got people coming from even those territories possibly, maybe not that quite far, but influence at least. I think prefect and governor is an old Assyrian word too, so coming up from the north as well. What is he doing? Let's government to encapsulate the whole entire world, because that's where my power is at. Except, I think we've seen something about that before in the Old Testament. Do you remember that? There was another warning about it, and it happened to be up at the same place, right? So we'll go back to the Tower of Babel, because what is he erecting right now? He's erecting a tower, bringing all peoples to himself to consolidate that power so they're not all scattered around everywhere. It's not going to work, though. It's not going to work. And so I think we already talked about this idea of, could be meant to, represent a god here, Marduk, Nebu. That's where Nebuchadnezzar gets his name, right? He's named after even a god. But at the end of the day, what is this? It's idolatry of national identity or even world identity that is not of God. Right? Ultimately, I think that's what we're seeing, right? And hey, he's pretty serious about it because he's got a pretty good penalty there too, right? I want you to turn over to Jeremiah 29, verse 22 real quick just to see that, because we have evidence that this wasn't a very common practice. It's like, let's just burn people in the furnace. But it was done, because you go over to that section in Jeremiah. And we're talking again in the time of Zedekiah, and this whole idea, behold, I will into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, I will deliver them. He will slay them before your eyes. Because of them, a curse will be used by all the exiles from Judah who are in Babylon, saying, may the Lord make you like Zedekiah and like Ahab, whom the king of Babylon roasted in the fire. So we see this other places too, although it is kind of strange, right? Like why choose that form of punishment? We saw some other forms of punishment earlier in chapter 2, like I'll just make your whole house a rubble heap, or we'll impale you, or something like that. But this is pretty specific, and I think we'll see some other Old Testament passages that maybe help us see what God's doing here. But I think, let's talk this through real quick. So remember how Daniel chapter 1 opened up. In the third year, king of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. Later on, we see this idea that he brings the vessels to the land of Shinar, which only other place we really seen that before was back in Genesis, right? Back with the Tower of Babel. We're following the same trap here. Does the Bible talk about that same kind of spirit of Babylon other places? So are we really only talking about Babylon? Because you got Assyria, you got Babylon, you get the Medo-Persian Empire, the Greece Empire, later Rome. Guess what? It's all Babylon. When you get to the New Testament, where do you see Babylon? Revelation, all right. So we get later on toward the end of Revelation, and we're calling, well, again, take it to be Rome. We're calling Rome Babylon, or Jerusalem Babylon. It depends on how you take that. But Peter uses that same language, like, to you, the church who's in Babylon. He addresses them as that. They use that term to refer to these world powers. Babylon, going all the way back to the Tower of Babel. It's the ultimate sign of pride. It's the ultimate sign of rebellion, of idolatry, misplaced authority, everything else. And then here, again, that golden image is meant to unite the whole empire, people of every language. But will he accomplish that? Any thoughts or comments on 1 through 7? Yeah. Yes. Sure. Mm-hmm.
Government officials, but 4 times it uses that exact recitation of the musical instruments
Yes. Same kind of thing. Some of those come from different places as well, which is kind of interesting. But at the same time, I think it's showing, hey, you're bringing in whatever kind of music or worship you might be doing for all your other different kinds of gods. So that's that kind of worship with music in this sense kind of was associated with idolatry as well. So again, maybe you can speculate a little bit about those coming from different origin points too. But he repeats it over and over again. So at the very least, it's he said it, they do it, and then we're going to get that repeated, guess what? Another time coming up here in the next couple verses. So I think that pattern will stand out. Yeah, four times, exactly. Yeah, Bill?
It's actually pretty amazing because this is not the only place you see that sort of repetition.
No.
Repetition in the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And many times that happens in the Bible, it still has an amazing amount of information.
It does. It's true, and it is very specific. We do see that there, and so we're going to see the actual rebellion, if you want to call it that, from Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is exactly against those very specific terms. Let's read that then, real quick there. So this is a longer section there, as we take a look at this moment of what I'm going to call a righteous rebellion, starting there in verse 8. I'll go ahead and read that. For this reason, at a certain time, or at the time, certain Chaldeans came forward and brought charges against the Jews. They responded and said to Nebuchadnezzar the king, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, trigon, psaltery, bagpipe, and all kinds of music is to fall down and worship the golden image. But whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast in the midst of a furnace of blazing fire. Well, you knew that already, but now we get to the new information. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the administration of the province of Babylon, namely Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have disregarded you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image which you have set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in rage and anger, gave orders to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then these men were brought before the king. Nebuchadnezzar responded to them, said, Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up? Now, if you are ready, at the moment you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the lyre, the trigon, the psaltery, the bagpipe, and all kinds of music, to fall down and worship the image that I have made, very well. But if you do not worship, you will immediately be cast into the midst of a furnace of blazing fire. And what God is there who can deliver you out of my hands? I'll pause right there, actually. We'll read verses 16 through 18 in just a moment, because I want to build up that tension before we get to their response. Lots of repetition, right? We're still there again. And that's okay. I think we're emphasizing really what they had opportunity to do. We know they already didn't obey the first time he said it, but what does Nebuchadnezzar do once they come before him? Here's your chance. That makes it almost harder, right? Here's your chance, and I'm watching you now. Because did Nebuchadnezzar even know that they didn't worship that first time? No. In fact, look at that question there. Like, who's reporting? Who reports the individuals who are not following the decree of Nebuchadnezzar? I like that word, malicious Chaldeans, right? Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a good question that I don't have an answer to.
It's like, why was Daniel not here?
Yes. At least he's on a trip. He's doing something else. Verse 49 of chapter 2, of course, we do see that it seems like Daniel is promoted in one way, and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego are together. Again, you're thinking like, well, if Daniel's promoted, that means like, wouldn't he be even more visible? And I don't know. I don't know how to answer that fully and entirely, but.
Well, consider, these young men who've been in his court are not of that nation, of Chaldeans.
Yes.
And they have been put over the city
Mm-hmm.
to rule the city. So what is their opposition?
Yeah. It's going to be people of either different ethnic background, with that being the Chaldeans, right? Or remember, who were the Chaldeans? Like, we saw them back in chapter 2. Who really were they? What kind of roles did they fill? Yeah, the astrologers, the magicians, the sorcerers, right? So whether it's kind of like a role or just like the ethnicity there too, they're different from Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So it wasn't trying to, fully avoid that Daniel question, but it is interesting, right? And maybe it's because he is of higher promote that now we're just looking at who can we attack because they're not going to bother with Daniel. I don't know. That's a possibility.
This will make chapter 2. What
Yes.
Daniel request?
Mm-hmm.
He requested that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be put over the province of Babylon.
Yes.
Where is the complaint coming from?
The province of Babylon.
Daniel is actually at the national level.
Yes.
And these guys are at, for better term, they're like state government.
Yes. Yes.
So maybe the whole issue is there's some malicious Chaldeans in the state government that don't like them, and they brought a charge against these 3 guys.
Yeah.
It doesn't say anything about Daniel one way or the other.
It doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't, right? And we are zooming in to what you see. The wording's pretty specific. Appointed over the administration of the province of Babylon there in verse 12. So that seems to make sense. Did I miss another comment or question? Yes. Yeah, all the people. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think that's a fair point too, which is where I'm like, I don't know. They seem to be in different places before. When we say all, are we talking about all? I mean, sure, not every single person on the face of the earth did come and attend this dedication. But at the same time, we do see a focus in on his friends. Because what do we see with Daniel in chapter 2? Focus was on him, not really Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego so much. I mean, they were kind of involved, and they were involved in some of the prayer. But ultimately, it's Daniel who did the action. Now it's their turn, right? Without Daniel there, which is kind of interesting as well. Have a chance and opportunity to show their own faithfulness, which I think is another powerful point there too. Yeah, Bill.
You don't have to round up everybody. All you have to do is make an example.
True. Exactly. And I think that's exactly where we're going with this, which makes Nebuchadnezzar, what do we see there? In rage and anger give these orders because someone is going against, even if it's just these 3 Jewish men going against my command. So yeah, we saw that. The Chaldeans, maybe they're jealous from those past events, right, involving foreigners. We saw in chapter 1 and chapter 2 so far. Nebuchadnezzar probably could have been ignorant to this if not for this report. And guess what this sounds like? Remember another time, we haven't read it yet, but in the future, in a whole other kingdom, in a parallel chapter, like chapter 6, Daniel. Yeah, not. He's praying to God, and they see him, and so that's the spark that puts him in the lion's. So see the parallels there? I think we're intentionally doing that too, as this, and really that's that next point. It becomes a pattern, right? We already had that pattern with who? Joseph, Esther, like you can keep on going on and on. That kind of opposition, maliciousness is going to be true today in any time in which God is a true king. Which is always. So yeah, it's to be expected that we should be seeing that kind of opposition, even for us today, which I think we look around and we're like, oh, we got it pretty good. And so that could be a marker of just, hey, we don't have oppression like this, or maybe we're not showing that faithfulness the way we should. Again, I think circumstances depend on that, but it's something for us to ponder. So Nebuchadnezzar's reaction to this insubordinate behavior. Not happy, right? Anger, rage, we see that there. Who does he seem to trust more in? The accusers or the accused? He's going to side with the accusers, right? So why would be so see Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in chapter 1? Choose not, I mean, maybe Nebuchadnezzar didn't see this, it was more of his captains, choose not to eat the king's choice food. Didn't he see in chapter 2 Daniel saying, hey, here, no, I can solve this problem? Not really a sign of disobedience, I guess, but he knows. What did he say at the very end of chapter 2? Surely your God is a God of gods, the Lord of kings, and revealer of mystery. So he's acknowledging God. But no, he's still angry. isn't quite there yet with understanding who God is.
Acknowledge the power of God, because the question he throws at Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is like, so just which God is it that's going to
Yeah.
rescue you out of my hand? So there's your problem.
Yes.
To the verse.
Yes. And remember, mindset of a polytheistic kind of background. I have a God for this, and a God for that, and a God for this, and a God for that. He admitted Daniel's God was a God who, he's a revealer of mysteries God. And now he's going to say, where is your rescuing God? But guess what? They're the same. They're the same God. And so he's going to start understanding that as we see this character development of Nebuchadnezzar. But he's still angry. We see what happens. So I think we got this idea. This is an affront to his character. He set this image up. He's trying to unite all peoples. I'm trying to do, maybe in his mind, a good thing here or a prideful thing here. They're standing in his way. He needs to set that precedent for others to follow, right? We kind of mentioned that already. Set an example. And notice verse 15, again, what God is there who can deliver you out of my hands? And that's an important phrase because, one, it's kind of prophesying what's going to happen, right? Inadvertently. Remember back in chapter 2 in verse 11 there, where they say, oh, we can't interpret your dream. He said, who no one else could declare to the king except God's whose dwelling place is not with mortal flesh, right? So they're actually pointing to the true solution. Same thing with Nebuchadnezzar. There is a God who rescues, who delivers. But do you know how our God is characterized? Not that Nebuchadnezzar read Deuteronomy 32. But listen to this real quick. You can flip over there if you want to. But Deuteronomy 32 and verse 39, it's like the same wording. Deuteronomy 32 and verse 39 there. See now that I am he, there is no God beside me. It is I who put to death and who give life. I have wounded, and it is I who heal, and there is no one who can deliver from my hand. That's the God we're talking about. So, yeah, Nebuchadnezzar never says he's a god, but he kind of suggests it here, doesn't he? Or at least the God who you're supposed to be worshiping and representing in that statue, well, it's still an affront to me. He might as well be worshiping me. He needs a reminder that he is not God. He has power, but who gave him that power? Any thoughts there before we jump into the answer?
It's kind of funny when Nebuchadnezzar approaches this. It's almost like perhaps you didn't hear.
Yep.
I'm going to give you a second chance. Strike up the band. Yeah, it's either the second chance or he didn't believe you.
That's true, right? And like maybe they got it wrong. Because maybe he did have some like trust and faith in him. He's angry, but at the same time, he gives them a second chance. That does say something with Nebuchadnezzar in some senses. He's still going to throw him in the fiery furnace. But here's the pivotal moment, though, right? This is what the whole chapter focuses in on. We start off with a decree. We're going to end with a decree. I'll just put all these up. We're going into that penalty of death and that accusation. We're going to see them delivered from death. The king is enraged right here, we just read. And then right after, we're reading this next section, verses 16 and 18. He's going to be enraged one more time. What are we pointing to? The only key factor there that stands on its own, it's that faithful obedience that we see starting in verse 16. Let's read that now. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to give you an answer concerning this matter. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But even if he does not, let it be known to you, O king, if we are not going to serve your gods, that we are not going to serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Do they give an answer? What'd they literally say? We do not need to give an answer. We don't need to answer to you, that's pretty bold in front of the king, which shows where their mind is at, shows where their obedience and loyalty is. But did they really give an answer? They gave an answer through their actions, through their admissions, through their proclamations of who their God is. What can we learn from this statement of faith and trust? Anything that stood out to you there and what they say or what they don't say even? Yeah, Byron?
So, he's our God, no matter what happens, that, whether he chooses to deliver us or not.
Yep. And isn't that interesting? And really, I don't even know if we need to read verse 17 as like a, God will do this. I think it's more of a if. Like, if he chooses to do this, then that will be the outcome. If he doesn't, this will be the outcome as well.
We're happy with either one.
Happy with either one. Yes.
Very similar to the prayers we pray when we have health issues and
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
We know God can make us well. He may not choose to make us well.
Yeah.
And whatever happens, we trust in him. It just doesn't matter
Yeah.
what happens.
Yeah.
We know he's a God that we can trust.
Yeah. They trust in God's will, right? And now here's the hard part is like, we're like, oh, we'll say your will be done, which I think is a good prayer to pray. We see Jesus do the same thing. But there's a revealed will of God where we know this is what he said, this is what he told us to do and not to do. So we're certainly not going to do this thing, but they have no idea what his will be, his circumstantial will, right? What's the circumstance going to end up like? They don't know. But they still put their trust in his will either way, one way or the other. And again, there's really no need for an answer. That might sound arrogant, like, we don't need to answer you. But it's more of like, we already gave our answer a long time ago when we didn't bow down. They already answered this, like how long ago. They've already made up their mind when they did that, right? Yes.
We don't need to tell you again.
Yeah, true, yeah.
That's kind of the way I think.
Yeah.
It could be.
No, I think that's a great point there. It's like, you've already seen our answer acted out, and we believe it. It's not just saying words, it's doing the thing. So, yeah, God can speak for himself, and he's going to here in a moment. It's a statement of resolve. There's no argument here. There's nothing that's going to change their mind. Well, if you choose to spare anyone else who chooses to do this, then maybe we'll go ahead and... No, they don't compromise. But the unknown outcome does not cause their faith to waver. The deliverance isn't dependent on sparing life. I do want us to see here that he will deliver us out of your hand. Does deliverance mean saving from death? Really doesn't. It really doesn't. Because if they die, would that mean that God's not a deliverer? That he's not one who rescues? We're offered the same promise, right? What can man do to me that's going to affect my, eternal life, right? Nothing. And that's the resolve they have here. I guess just real quick, just to play the other side of things, because this is probably where we might fall into more. They could have justified complying with the king's decree. Right? Like what are some reactions they could have given instead? Meaning, like, what are some of the things that we often do? I guess that's what I'm getting at. And you're not making a self-admission by raising your hand and answering, but just in general, humanity. What do we do and say?
Just do it in function.
Yes.
Just, okay, we'll do this because we don't really need.
Yes, right. Like, yeah, I might do this or go along with it, but my heart's not in it, so it doesn't count. Okay. Well, I won't add any commentary though. So let's see if we have any more.
It possibly could have also thought, if we don't, and they kill us, where's our influence on the nation? We're not going to be there anymore to influence. We're good.
God could accomplish his purpose through me if I live longer to influence more people. Y'all read my minds there. That's good. I think that was the first one. Well, okay, yeah, could they have done that action without meeting it? Well, maybe. Does bowing down equate to actual worship? Does doing the action actually mean you're worshiping the God or Nebuchadnezzar or this national identity? Or we could do more of God's will if we live. That was good. Yet they would be giving a false representation. He said to obey them, and they did it, right? So they'd be giving a false representation of who their God is. Because if they don't do as well, then what power does he have? What? Yeah, put your finger behind your back, all that, right? Again, God's will could be that they not live, and that he would still be delivering them. They have their trust in him and what is to come. So again, we could fall in that same situation, yet, do we have that same resolve as these three individuals?
Their answer was really like the ultimate answer of believing God was in control, which has been the crux of all of the first three chapters.
Yes.
It really is like,
Yes.
it shows sort of the culminating point in the struggle between Nebuchadnezzar and them around who is in control. And their answer really shows who they believe is in control.
And you know that struggle and that tension is there, and that Nebuchadnezzar is lost, because look at verse 19. Then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with wrath, and his facial expression was altered towards Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And he goes and wants the furnace to be heated even more. We'll read the rest of that in a second. But a piece of irony, but also there's your response to that answer. Do you see what he ended on saying in verse 8, or they end up saying in verse 18, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up? We missed this from the original language. In verse 19, we have another common word there. There's another image being talked about. Whose image is it? His face. That word face is this image. It's the same word. So we have this. We're not going to worship. You cannot control us to worship this golden image. And then Nebuchadnezzar cannot control himself to alter his image because he's so angry, because that's the ultimate sign and showing of not just their faith and obedience, but of rebellion, to say, you are not God. And there's nothing more infuriating than people who are insubordinate and are okay with it. And I mean, I get that as a parent, because I've seen that happen before. You should be crying right now that I'm a little frustrated with you. Don't smile at me. Or I've had students, when I used to teach, I'd be like, I cannot believe the audacity. But you can see how frustrating that would be for him. So of course he's going to, all right, what do we see in verse 19 there? He's going to heat the furnace 7 times more than it was usually heated. He commands the certain valiant warriors who were in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in order to cast them into the furnace of blazing fire. Then these men were tied up in their trousers, their coats, their caps, and other clothes, and were cast in the midst of the furnace of blazing fire. For this reason, because the king's command was urgent, and the furnace was made extremely hot, the flame of the fire slew the men who carried up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fire still tied up. Let's quickly just read this last little bit, because I know there's a lot here, but more repetition, right? Nebuchadnezzar the king was astounded and stood up in haste, and he said to his high officials, was it not 3 men who were cast, bound into the midst of the fire? And they replied to the king, certainly, O king. And he said, look, I see 4 men loosed and walking about in the midst of the fire without harm, and the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the furnace of blazing fire. He responded and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, come out, you servants of the Most High God, and come here. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the midst of the fire. The satraps, the prefects, the governors, the king's high officials gathered around and saw in regards of these men that the fire had no effect on the bodies of these men, nor was the hair of their heads singed, nor were their trousers damaged, nor had the smell of fire even come upon them. Okay. I mean, honestly, the answer they already gave in the last couple of verses is, there's the lesson, because we already know what's going to happen. But even still, it's amazing to see, right? So what does he tell them to do with that fiery furnace? The soldiers, let's crank up the heat. Like, I don't even know, 7 times, right? Why that? I don't know. But that's pretty high. Yeah, he's pretty mad. I mean, again, maybe hyperbole or exaggeration. We won't look at the times that Proverbs uses that term 7 to talk about like the maximum, right? But was this necessary? Wouldn't they have died in a 7 times less heated furnace? Like, he could have still made that example, right?
What I think is interesting about it is 22,
Mhm.
there's no doubt that it was killing power high.
Yes.
And that it killed those God
Yes.
was not protecting, and therefore it kind of proves that there was a protection
Yes.
from Almighty.
Yes. Yes, that is exactly right. Right. And this whole idea that the people who were not bound, the people who had secured their safety from the king by bowing down, they're the ones who are killed. Right? Like, that's very clearly there, right? And he's willing to sacrifice them. Yeah, get them in there, throw them on in, and they all die. And there's no power. He can't even show power here, right? He controlled them to make them bow down, but then they are the ones that end up dying, the captains and the soldiers and such. So again, maybe he's testing God. Or maybe he was kind of fearful of the words that they spoke. I don't know, but certainly we see they had that full protection. And why would he use your valiant warriors? Like, have they already? They're not rebelling before him, saying, "We have our spears, we have our weaponry. We're going to fight against you to the death, to not bow down to the idol, the statue." No, he gets his valiant warriors. Let's tie them up just in case they want to escape. They already willingly submitted themselves to it, right? Mm-hmm.
I think part of the mockery for Nebuchadnezzar is like he spent so much of his time building a physical kingdom,
Yes.
and they're coming at him with like a god that he can't even see. And he's like, "Where is your God?"
Yes.
He's like, "I have this massive image. I have all this." Like he's using his valiant warriors, but like, where is their God?
Yeah.
And he's kind of like, "You're willing to give up your life for somebody you can't see, but I'm right here with all this power, and you can't even bow down to me."
Exactly. It's so true, right? And this is the full display. I mean, can't get more visual than flames and fires. You can feel it, you can smell it, you can see it, yet nothing. Well, something, but not what he expected.
It's kind of ironic. It calls all these people from all of the nations to see this image, and now they gather around while he throws these people in the furnace, and guess what? Loses his power just in one fell swoop.
It's my favorite point of this whole section. Let's list that repetition one more time. And what do they get to go back to their own governments and areas that they're over with knowledge that this is the God who delivers, right? Not uniting. If anything, could be dividing, but we'll see. So real quickly, because we're already getting toward the end of our time, I think why do you think he was looking in the furnace? If you wouldn't look if you didn't have any doubts, right? You wouldn't look into the furnace, and I don't even know what you could see anyway, but certainly, instead of 3 men who are bound, he sees 4 men loosed. And they're walking around. I have to point this out really quickly. Let's look over at Isaiah 43. Like, this is just the awesome showing. And really, there's a lot of sections of Isaiah I wanted to get to read, but we don't have time to. But look at Isaiah 43 and verse 1 and 2. We'll read that. This is right in the context of Babylon. Their destruction is being prophesied about. And so what comes after? Well, let's talk about you, those who are righteous and who serve me. But now, thus says the Lord, your creator, O Jacob, he who formed you, O Israel, do not fear, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by my name. You are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. And through the rivers, they will not overflow you. And when you walk through the fire, you will not be scorched. And nor will the flame burn you. For I am the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, your Savior. And he talks about all these other nations who he destroyed, right? It's in that same context. This is the God who delivers, of course. And yeah, we already talked about the doubts piece there. Won't make too much of this. See, and how does he describe the 4th man in the furnace?
As the son of the gods.
Son of the gods, or a son of the gods, right? Interesting phrase. Our mind goes all sorts of different places with that, of course. But has an appearance of a man, so we know that. We're going to, well, one, I guess we get an answer. Well, what God could deliver you? Well, we have at least, here a representation of that to some extent. We're going to see later on in verse 28, he refers to him as an angel. So we kind of see what Nebuchadnezzar kind of meant by that phrase. Some kind of divine being, right? Very, very clearly he's seeing as interceding in that way. And we'll save more of that talk when we get to chapter 6, 8, and 9, when the same kinds of phrases or images are alluded to. So we'll leave it at that. But if you had other questions, you can ask, of course, but God is with them. He is walking with them. Notice, did God deliver them from the fire? Did they experience the fire? Where is God? Is he with them, saving them, blocking them from reaching the fire? He's saving them through the fire. He's with them in the fire. Right? I mean, again, think of our own lives and the trials, tribulations we go through. We might think, oh, God, spare me from this thing. No, where is their mind before they even reach that? His will be done. Will he be with them? He is with them in the fire, right? He's with them in those times. We'll skip over some of this stuff, although I will say, what admission do we have from Nebuchadnezzar there as we get to the end? Come out! You servants of the Most High God. Why would that phrase be so important? What is he admitting there? Nebuchadnezzar's not the Most High God, nor does he serve the Most High God. That was the Most High God, like his patron god of Nebu or something. No, they're the servants of the Most High God. Now, does that mean that he believes there's only one God? He's just the highest one, but that's a lot better than, you have a God a revealer of mysteries. He serves that role, but that's really all he does back in chapter 2. No, now this is a fuller picture. We see this development ultimately in chapter 4. We'll use that phrase again later on, the very beginning of chapter 4. So don't forget that part. But, Nebuchadnezzar, does he really believe in God? No, he's not showing faith here. He's just saying, we better stop this before it becomes more of a display. They can sit in there all night and still not burn. We see this acknowledgement, but again, you can go over to James 2, verse 19, and say, the demons also believe and shudder, but that's not what we're looking for here. That's not faith. Let's wrap up by reading verse 28 through 30, and then we'll kind of end with some final lessons. Thanks for your patience. Nebuchadnezzar responded and said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who put their trust in him, violating the king's command, and yielded up their bodies so as not to serve or worship any god except their own God. Just pause for a second. That would be hard to say and admit, wouldn't it? He's admitting they did all these disobedient things, and yet, therefore I will make a decree that any people, nation, tongue that speaks against anything offensive against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses are reduced to a rubbish heap, inasmuch as there is no other God who is able to deliver in this way. And then the king caused Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to prosper in the province of Babylon. There we go. I mean, here is Nebuchadnezzar being forced to humble himself. I erected a huge statue, image, representing my pride, my ego, my trust and national identity of what I'm trying to accomplish. And he's forced to admit, here's a God who delivers. Here's a God who delivers. This representation of my deliverance of the whole world? Nothing, right? And we don't have evidence of it, so it got shattered and smashed down at some point too, right? I think that's very clear. General comments about the end there, then we'll kind of just do our wrap up. Yeah, Bill?
I think it's interesting in verse 27 that these people who did bow down to God, the image of Nebuchadnezzar, who appear to be maybe the same ones who ratted them out, they come close and examine Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and realize that they have learned a lesson here. That lesson was far greater than just Nebuchadnezzar.
Yes. And I mean, that goes back to, again, look at the decree. It's not just that, I just went too far. It's not just that, the people are going to go and say like, oh yeah, I saw this thing happen. It's also, oh, now I need to go and tell the peoples, you can't speak against this God or you're going to have your house a rubble heap. So it's spreading again. It's all working reverse of what he expected. God makes things work for his people and for his name's sake, ultimately, right? Even something that seems so bad like this. Final lessons then, if we're going to take that principle of God is in control and make it a little bit more practical. What did they do at the end of the day that shows that God is in control? They trusted God. They confessed that he was a deliverer. But at the end of the day, they showed resistance. But how did they show resistance? They obeyed God rather than man. And in that obedience, was it saying, we're going to take up arms and go and fight? No, he doesn't do that. It's peaceful. It's, pretty silent too. They didn't go up with protest signs and say, I'm not going to do this. They just chose not to do it. They acted in that moment. They're fully engaged in this society, right? But they reminded through their actions and through their, again, love for their God and ultimately even love for the enemies around them, because they didn't go and start beating up the people who were doing. But they did it through their actions, through their influence. When we say God is in control, it better look like that, right? And it starts with the action, not even just saying it. They don't say it till much later. They start with the action first. I think it's just an amazing part of this chapter. Yeah.
It's a good illustration of what it means to confess God or Jesus before men.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that everywhere we go we have to be talking about Jesus this and God did that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's all we do.
Yeah.
It is at the point of the trial. We don't give in. We give God the glory.
Yeah.
We confess God before men.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so true. And as we look at all this, I know we put up there individual, national, cosmic levels of battles being fought and won. Hopefully you can see how this all works out in that way, right? The gods are defeated. He's now the Most High God in their minds. The national level, again, we're defeating the spirit of Babylon that we see in all these different nations. This whole idea of raising up a national identity, a world identity that we're all going to being the only way for humanity to be redeemed and restored and brought into unity? He's not wrong that that's the only solution, is for there to be only one kingdom. But it's not his kingdom. Is he wrong that there is one image that we can see that shows off the glory of God? It's not it. But the one is that we get to serve? One last passage, go over to Colossians chapter 1. I think it's very clear there that this is, we're all about one kingdom that is going to unite and through that restore and redeem all peoples. But it's under the headship of that one image of God himself. Look at verse 13. For he rescued us, delivered us, right, there's that word again, from the domain, the kingdom of darkness, and transferred us to the kingdom of his beloved Son, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. He is the image of the invisible God. Nebuchadnezzar couldn't see him, and maybe that's why he acted the way. But we see him created, both in the heavens and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. He is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, so that he himself will come to have first place in everything. For it's the Father's good pleasure for all fullness to dwell in him, and through him to reconcile all things to himself. Right? Fix all things, bring all things, unite all things together, like Nebuchadnezzar's plan was. And what comes of that? Having made peace through the blood of his cross. Through him, I say, whether things on earth or things in heaven. That's what Daniel's pointing to. Daniel 3 is pointing to. This is the one who we get to serve, and we're blessed for that. All right. We got through Daniel 3. Thanks for your attention and participation there. Lots of great comments. We'll pick up with chapter 4 in a couple weeks.